Welcome, Jessi Holden, to the Dish with Dina podcast. I'm so eager to interview you and get to learn a little bit more about what you do.
I'm glad to be here today. Thanks for having me.
We were just talking about if we met each other, and we decided we probably did not because I think I've just come across your name or your face online. But walk us through because we do have something in common. We are both in the dietetic profession. So share with us about how you got started in this field and also how you started with understanding your specialty in more of the family and culinary world.
Yeah. So, goodness, I mean, I've been a dietitian now for 10 or 11 years. And when I first started, one of my internship rotations was with a YMCA, and I was a part of some cooking classes that were happening in the community. And I was just like, this is amazing. And nobody told me you could do this as a dietitian. And a lot of times people were like, well, you can't really because they don't pay a dietitian, which is true in that regard. It was a grant funded position. However, once I graduated and got my license and all that kind of stuff, I was offered a position to teach it within my home community. And that made it even more special. So I was teaching 6 week cooking classes that were reaching people of all backgrounds, but specifically working with a lot of people who were using SNAP Ed benefits and things like that, where they needed that extra support and to learn like what's the best way for me to spend this money, how am I cooking these meals, and so that really, I don't know, that really dove me into the culinary world. I've always liked cooking. I wanted to be a chef when I was little for like the longest time. So I guess I'm trying to just like marry those things together. But I love cooking, and I just love that like every single week I was teaching somebody like how to cut an onion. I don't know. That's always my example because it's such a staple food for a lot of people and it adds so much flavor to your food. But just learning how to chop produce, learning how to add canned products, add frozen, like what are the best ways to do all these kinds of things. I really found I could teach my best when I was in the kitchen or like I had food in my hands and I could just grab it and like show people what to do with it. So that's kind of where I got started. And then I transitioned a bit into some rehabilitation nutrition. And I worked with a lot of people with spinal cord injuries. And I had an outpatient program that I ran. And then I worked with cancer patients, stroke patients. I mean, I worked with a whole realm of people for like 6 years. And I think that broadened what I did, but I always found ways to like sneak cooking in. I would talk to my director. I'm like, how about a cooking demo for people who have had a stroke and they want to learn how to cook differently? Or how about one for adaptability when we're learning how to use different utensils and things like that? So cooking has just kind of always melded into whatever I'm doing. I had my first baby right when the pandemic happened, so right in 2020 early, and that kind of obviously made a big pivot in my life in general. I think everybody had a pivot, but then I launched my own business not too long after that. And fast forward a bit, I had my second baby, and I've just learned so much about culinary nutrition, feeding littles and like toddlers and like marrying that all together in a really peaceful way. So my meal times feel really happy and exciting and fun. And I'm just realizing how so many people that I know and like reach are not having those happy fun times. And that's what I want for people. So long answer, but that's where I kind of got to where I am today.
Yeah, this is all fascinating to me because it sounds like you really span the gamut of the life cycles. And
Mhm.
also so many chronic conditions that a lot of times when we are talking to people within our profession, it is the technically what we do. And I've explained this a lot of times on the podcast as well. We do what's called medical nutrition therapy. So we're helping people manage their condition through modifications of food, diet, etc., other lifestyle habits. But we don't sometimes talk about the culinary discussions and things like you just mentioned, adaptable utensils or dysphagia diets, like where you have to have texture modifications for people who have problems with chewing and swallowing if they're recovering from a
Yeah.
surgery or whatever, condition that they might be having in their
Mhm.
oral cavities and so on. And also, one thing that I was thinking of too when I was preparing some notes for our discussion is also the food safety discussion. Not only how to stay safe in the kitchen in general with knife usage and hot pots and pans and stoves and fires and all that, but also when you're dealing with children or the older population, you're also dealing with what's known as an immunocompromised community. So people who might be a little bit more susceptible to foodborne illnesses. So all of that to say, I have a lot of follow-up questions for you right now. But I think what I want to start first is just give us an idea of what a typical week in the life of you is right now. You're currently an entrepreneur. Is that fair to say? You're running as
Yeah.
like an independent contractor to things as well? Do you get plugged in, or are you taking on clients and that's more the way that you approach your business?
Yeah, a little mix of everything. I'm definitely running my own business. I get some clients through contracting work, and I also teach a lot of local community classes at libraries. I do a lot of cooking classes, and sometimes they are like doing chopping and stirring and all that. And sometimes they're just kind of doing assembly work, and it's a class for like kids and their parents. So I try to get into my community as much as possible. So I love doing those whenever I can, whenever possible. I'm trying to do that. But a typical week in my life right now, I've got, like I said, the two kids. So now my one is going off to preschool, which is awesome, and that's going well, knock on wood. And my baby's still home with me the other times, but it's all working out where I got more time for my business now, which is really exciting for me. So I would say a lot of my work is developing online resources right now for my website that help people like who are just searching for, a little bit of extra tips on, say, like toddler mealtime battles or like quick healthy family recipes or, just some tips on meal planning in general because we don't get it yet. So so I do a lot of that work. I work with families on their meal planning skills, and sometimes it involves a lot of like reworking their relationships with food and as a family. So that is a lot of what I really love to do as well. I love to teach the culinary. I love to teach meal planning and help those skills, like create a more peaceful mealtime experience. But I would be, a fool to think that there's not always like something else going on usually in the background, especially for parents who are navigating maybe healing or reworking their own relationship with food. So I also do a lot of that one-on work too, or one-on-one work if they're looking for that. And yeah, I'm trying to, I film things for Instagram, social media, blah, blah, blah. I have a lot of mixed feelings about that, but I do enjoy it, but I only do it when I enjoy it. So that it's a mixed bag for me. But I really love sharing things in my community space on Facebook and honestly just like getting out and about and talking to people about food. I love it.
Well, that's something I'd like to discuss too, because a lot of times we have discussions around if you're building a business or even if you're just interested in doing something on the side that is not necessarily what you do as a full-time job, how do you go about making connections, networking, marketing, whether or not you're, and especially in the time of a pandemic too, did you have to transition to more virtual things? Were you
Mhm.
reaching out through emails? Was it word of mouth? Tell us a little bit about how that ramped up for you and what seems to be the thing that works best for you right now.
Yeah, I definitely made a huge pivot and did a lot of virtual work. I think I dove into my business with the like prize in my eyes of like, oh, I'm going to make this online course and it's going to sell great and everything's going to be wonderful. That was not the case. I learned real quick how to actually effectively run my own business. and and that's okay. I think, when I look back now I'm like, whatever. I had a lot of learning and I've got a lot of great content filmed for the future. But I definitely went to virtual. I ran an online paid community for a good long while, which I really did enjoy, but I just felt like after having my second baby, I just could not devote to it. But I was teaching monthly, twice a month, like cooking classes where everybody could sign on and we would cook the meal together, taste it together, all that kind of stuff. It was a lot of fun. I'd love to bring more of that back to my community space now where I encourage families to all cook together while we're all in like I imagine this like big Zoom room, we're all cooking, it's chaotic and so much fun. Um Anything that helps bring like more joy back into people's kitchens, that's what I really love doing. So I do a lot of virtual work and a lot of virtual networking, but I try to do it in person as much as possible. Like I go to the libraries to talk to people about bringing my classes to their community spaces, or I talk with I'm a part of a CSA, so I've been talking with a farm about doing some cooking demos as a part of their CSA pickup days. Or I work with a lot of the schools in the area. I just try to get in wherever I can. And it helps that I've got like a couple good friends like right here in the area that are also dietitians and doing some similar work, so we all try to help each other out and we all have our own kind of special niches in that way, so that's really helpful. And the other thing I will say I found during the pandemic was I found a group of gals who we all have like similar culinary desires as far as nutrition, all a little bit in the spaces, but we come together. It was monthly during the pandemic, and now it's been more like quarterly. And we just come together and kind of share what's going well in our businesses, what's not going well. And that's been very helpful just to know I've got like a group of people who will rally, support, offer suggestions. It's been really, really huge for me.
This is the realistic spin I want to put on some of these things. It sounds so glamorous when we're like, I want to run my own business and I want to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
But it can be quite isolating. You could definitely be flying by the seat of your pants. A lot of the conversations I've had in previous discussions with past guests, we've also talked about these characteristics that certain traits have. Like we're very type A, but we're also fearless, but we're also perfectionists. And so I think if you could share some guidance about what it might take, like, understanding there might be some rough spots and recognizing, like you said, the support around you. Could there be any words of wisdom that you can give to somebody who is maybe either currently in schooling for, has not yet gotten their credential to do whatever their advancement degree is going to be, or somebody who might be switching careers and is curious about stepping outside of something that might felt kind of comfortable to them? Is there any guidance that you could possibly give them?
Gosh, I mean, it definitely depends where they're at and what they're trying to do. I want to say the advice of like, go for it, you can do it. And that does sound great. And I try to tell myself that like routinely. I actually also tell people like, you're doing great no matter what you're doing right now, you're doing great. Like, I think that advice goes pretty far as well as in a lot of different work in my business. But as far as a new entrepreneur or somebody wanting to make a pivot, I just the thought of pivoting, just the idea of doing it, it's like, I think you're doing great. And then my advice is to just slow down and know that you have time. I definitely feel like when I started, I rushed into like, create a program, post on social media, have a podcast, have a YouTube channel, like post everything. And I was like, whoa, that doesn't work. You need systems, you need time. Like, I definitely used to have this sensation of like, oh, somebody else is already like selling something like this. Like, I don't have enough time anymore. Like, I'm out of time. That product won't work because somebody else is already doing it. I ran out of time. And it's like, you have so much time. You have time. Um, but I also understand the sentiment of like feeling like you don't have time if you're not making the amount of money that you might want or need to make for your family. It's stressful. So, um, I don't know, having support, having people you can talk to about it is really helpful. A lot of local communities have entrepreneur groups. So even just looking like with your chamber of commerce or something like that, like find a group, ask questions. I don't believe there's any stupid questions. I know that's another cliche thing, but I have found myself asking different things that I didn't even like think I wanted to ask, but I'd be like, "Oh, well, what about this?" And then someone would be like, "Oh, yeah, you just do it this way, or you have to do this with your taxes, or or whatever it is." Um, yeah, I don't know. Go for it, but create systems for yourself and take your time.
Good enough is better than perfect. So just start
Mhm.
somewhere and get through that first step, and that hopefully will create a momentum. And there is a saying about something like you only need to know 5% more than people around you. So not everybody is aware of what you're putting together. So even if you think, whoever's listening to this, even if you think it needs to be a couple of steps more into it before you feel confident enough to send out your service, your product into the world, odds are it's fine. And then
Yeah.
also the discussion around ambition, like, we're very much at the beck and call of the things that are around us. And so I think taking a step back and not necessarily, like you were saying, not necessarily looking at things as competition, but as maybe idea building or partnerships or collaborations, support, because I forget where I heard this, but somebody had said something, and maybe a podcast I was listening to, about there's a coffee shop on every corner. There's a laundromat on every corner. So it's not like these people are afraid to open up their coffee
Yeah.
shops or laundromats. Like there's also an area or a resource or a service that you can provide that that particular target audience is going to want to work with you and not with someone else. So I think that's something too with, having that what's called the abundance mindset versus a limiting
Mhm.
belief, I think. And also the resources as well. I feel like either people are paying a lot of money for business coaching, which they may or may not find beneficial, Or they're completely forgetting that there are free resources out there too, like the Small Business Administration. They have tons of online resources on how to design a business plan. They have retired people who can help you do your taxes. All of these things are out there if you just, enter onto your search engine, whatever it is you're looking for. We do live in a very good time of life where there's a lot of stuff out there that is within reach. We don't have to hunt things down anymore. Jessi, will you share with us too some of the discussions around, culinary background? People could be a lot of different things. They could be a personal trainer and not be a registered dietitian. They could be a chef and not be a registered dietitian. What do you find are the benefits of having that credential in your back or front pocket, as it were? And I know you spoke to this a little bit as you were sharing with us some of your experiences, but what would maybe encourage someone to continue with getting a dietetics credential versus maybe not going through one at all and getting certified in something else?
Mm. I think it's the science background. I used to not like science as a kid, but I really grew to love it. And then when I got into dietetics, I was like, oh, this is a lot of science. But in the end, like I know there's a lot of people out there who don't trust science, unfortunately. So that is tough. Honestly, in this profession, that's kind of a hard thing that there's been such a distrust in science. But I love and think that that does set you apart when you're a dietitian, that you do have the science behind you. You do have, hopefully, the means to understand research and interpret it. I think, at least for me and what I do, I think families maybe inherently trust me a little bit more because I am speaking from a scientific background. I am speaking from things that like can be said for not just across, I don't want to say like across the board, but I can say like, well, yeah, in general, fruits and veggies can help with this. But the thing is, it depends. Where I see a lot of influencers, personal trainers, and there's so many influencers and personal trainers who don't do this, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot that create a lot of harm and put a lot of fear mongering out there, which drives me up many walls. But um because they'll single out certain things. They'll use words like this is toxic. And I'm sure there's dietitians out there who do that too, unfortunately. So I just think like being a dietitian for me has given me the leg up of like, hey, I've got something behind what I'm saying. I'm not just telling you to meal plan for whatever reason. I'm not just telling you to pair these foods together in this meal plan. One of my favorite phrases is for shits and giggles. Like that's what I wanted to say. I think that's important distinction when you're a dietitian. Like you can like use that and say like I'm not bullshitting you basically. Like this is real. Or like when people ask me like, "Oh, how much protein, should I put in my meal plan?" And I'm just like, "Let's just calm down on the protein." Like let's just calm down. Let's just talk about like back up and talk about food in general first. Like so I just think with my credential I can meet someone where they're at. I can understand where they want to go, but I can also peel back some layers and kind of help them unlearn and rewire a couple things so that moving forward they'll meet whatever goal it is that they have for their family, they can get there based on things that we know are more likely to help them get there.
I'm so glad you're speaking on this because this is a great segue for my next question, which has to do about hot topics or things that might get your panties in a bunch. And also, it speaks directly to a lot of the conversations I had this week with I had some new clients that came into my private practice, and we had so many that were women of about my age in their 40s and 50s and so, and just the undoing, the unlearning of language from growing up in a time that felt very specific about body image sizes. And I don't necessarily want this conversation to go around all of that, but really unlearning the diet culture language and
Yeah.
taking away the quote unquote toxicity of things too. That has chemicals in it. I'm like, girl, everything has chemicals in it. Can we please clarify what we mean by chemicals? Or this is very
Yeah.
highly processed, and that's okay too, because there's a place for processed foods. And it's also things like that I feel like are also being questioned as well. Jessi, you might find this, especially in the world of culinary, because you're looking at ingredients a lot of times too, where we're trying to really establish a much more functional relationship that people can have with their eating habits, and making sure that if we as the dietitians are explaining to them to cause them less harm than what's been done, it goes against everything that they have learned coming up as a teenager, or having 40 years of chronic dieting. So what are some of the things that you do speak about, or you might have to kind of to clarify, maybe when it comes to things like processed foods or toxic chemicals
Mhm.
in things, are you finding that people do ask you? I mean, you mentioned the thing about protein, which cracks me up. I say the same thing too. Like, are you
Protein.
undergoing pressure ulcer recovery? No, okay, so relax, you're good. Are there certain hot topics that do tend to come up, or the same kind of questions that come up that you find yourself having to clarify constantly?
Yeah, I think it can go as far as talking about oils, seed oils, and all of that. I think it can go in the realm of like macronutrients and talking about that. It goes into specific diets that I'm constantly either debunking or just explaining like, look, you can do whatever you want. I'm going to share with you what may or may not work with what you're going to do. Another big one though that comes up, of course, is processed food. So what I really like to start people with is getting rid of some of that toxic diet culture language, like the get rid of the good bad language, get rid of the even like healthy versus unhealthy. Just call food by its name. Just call it by its name. And yes, like we all know, like a Snickers maybe doesn't have the same nutritional profile as a Honeycrisp apple, but it's not supposed to. Those are two very different products. So I just like to debunk and kind of create an even playing field for all of food. I find I'm always busting some kind of myth or answering questions about the things I've already mentioned, but I also answer a lot of specific questions about like fresh produce versus frozen versus canned, dried, all of those things where people are like, well, is this good for me or should I do it this way? And what I find so interesting about that is like once we can actually even the playing field, your culinary possibilities and your meal planning and your cooking capabilities can go up so much because if society and yourself and family and whoever is putting all this pressure on you to cook from scratch, and I put that in quotes because I think people are confused about what that means sometimes. um, or if you're getting all this pressure to like, I have to make this like all fresh, or it has to, my cute little meal has to look like this. And it's like, wow, it really doesn't to have like a well balanced meal. I've been thinking of a client that's coming to mind right now where like she's learned that even just assembling foods together in a way that is balanced and helpful for her, she's like, this is cooking. I can do this for my kids once a week. I'm like, you can do however many times a week you want, but she wanted to do it once a week, whereas more just like a put it on the table and go. And it's like, yeah, you don't have to bake your own bread. You can if you want. You don't have to make your own pasta, make your own sauce, make your own meatballs, make your own this, do all that. Like you can use convenience in a way that gives you confidence. And that's what I really like to help people with. And you can also go for all the fresh produce, go for all this, but I don't know, a healthier relationship and a functional relationship with food, I think goes much further than any specific adherence to like something more toxic as far as the thoughts on food and diet.
Right, exactly. When you use that word toxic, it's really about the mindset around things, not
Yeah.
necessarily the toxicity of an ingredient.
Yes,
Uh,
exactly.
so I like having uncomfortable but necessary conversations. This is a very big election year. I like to discuss a little bit too about access and security around food. You mentioned before with SNAP Ed. Are there resources that you tend to share with your clientele as well who might not have the finances or even the equipment in their home in which to prepare meals, even at the very basic level?
Well, one thing I do with any client or family I'm going to work with is we talk about that ahead of time. What kind of equipment do you have? What kind of learning where are you at in your cooking skill levels? Like I like to talk about the skills, what kind of equipment we have, what kind of space do we have in our home. Online makes it look like everyone has these glamorous kitchens when many people I know do not have that and they feel less than because of that. And you're already starting feeling less than. It's so much harder to like achieve more, right? If you feel like you just don't have what someone else has that you're seeing online. So online is not reality all the time. Just like to throw that out there. But access is really important and it is an important year and it's also kind of a scary year, I think, for a lot of people too. One thing that I have learned is that I think some people don't believe that food is political when it is very political. And even when you think about I'll go with a personal example. My kids' preschool now, because of our state, we have free lunch, free breakfast, free snacks. And it's like, I know people have strong feelings about the school lunch programs. I've worked with school lunch programs with the grant. Like, I understand why they feel the way they do. I just don't think there's always the best understanding of like what is actually happening, what is going into making these meals go this way. That I could talk for hours and hours about school lunch, so I won't go there too much, but like if you don't have an understanding that like politics and food access go together, then there's definitely like some missed opportunity and education in there that we can all benefit from.
I 1000% agree. I'm going to shamelessly plug in this episode. I'll link to one of my Instagram lives and a YouTube video that I recently did about the politics of within food or healthcare and education as well. So absolutely, listen, everybody, advocate. Your voice is needed. We often say vote with your fork, your dollars, whatever, but whatever community you happen to be in, if you feel like you're not having access to something or somebody next door to you does, but you do not in your own neighborhood, make sure your voice is heard. Grab a bunch of people to try to join a group advocacy, write a letter to your representative. I am very fond of doing all those things. And the worst that can happen is it falls on not listening ears and it doesn't happen, but at least you try to make a difference or make a proper step towards getting something in your community that is worthwhile and beneficial.
Mm.
So let's talk a little bit too about basics and staples. Are there certain things that if all else fails and you're not necessarily a culinary whiz, or you might not have the funds or the ability to keep certain things in your home, what are some of the things that you tend to say, like, please try to at least have the top 10 of these things at all times?
Ooh, a top 10. That's tough. But if I'm thinking about my pantry, I usually have like staple grains that myself and my kids always will eat. So usually I've got pasta and whole grain pasta. I usually do a combination or it's just like one or the other, or I just kind of pour them both into one large jar and you get what you get. So we always have pasta on hand. We always have rice. And generally barley, and then throw in like some other different grains in there, like wheat berries, farro, couscous, quinoa, things like that. So I always have grains on hand. I always have canned produce. I love having lots of beans on hand. Canned tomatoes are a huge staple. Even canned pumpkin can add quite a lot of flavor and nutrition to a ton of different dishes, whether it's chili or casserole or soup or breakfast, like eggs. There's so many ways to use canned pumpkin. That's always a big staple for me. And then any other produce that you care for, whether it's a fruit or vegetable, whatever, get them and keep them on hand if you can. So grains, our canned produce, beans. I like encouraging people to keep dried lentils around. Um, People are not always as familiar with how to cook those, but they are so cheap and they are really easy to cook. Like you don't even have to do the perfect water to lentil ratio, just more water than lentils. Like that's it. Like that's your bare minimum. And you can take it up a notch and add like some broth and flavorings and things like that to it after you learn how to do it. But lentils can provide a lot of nutrition for a tiny amount of money, which is great. Dried spices are gonna last longer than fresh if you're not as like adept in like picking up fresh and learning how to freeze it and all of that. Like start basic. Like so I would say start with dried spices. Start with ones that just smell good to you, experiment with it. Keep salt on hand. I understand there's some people who have to work on their amount of salt that they are consuming. However, I think there's a little bit too much fear around salt as well. I think a lot of frozen stuff, keeping that on hand too is really helpful. I like to tell people to always have at least one frozen, either full meal or a frozen pizza or a variety of frozen vegetables. So that way, like just the other night, I found like frozen burritos in our freezer. I had frozen broccoli and we had some apples, and I was like, okay, dinner. Like that's it. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. So always work on staples first. Cooking oils are really important to keep on hand. My favorites are avocado, olive, canola. That's what I tend to cook with the most. I love sesame oil. So as far as like spices and seasonings, I think different vinegars are great to keep on hand, but also pre-made sauces and seasonings and spices. Culinary is wonderful. I love teaching people how to like say make their own salad dressing. They may not be there yet. You may be at the point where you're like, I just need to know what food to bring into my home. But one of the best budgeting tips I can give too with that is to be buying only kind of what you need. We tend to, not everybody, but we tend to have an abundance of food in our pantry at all times. And I do think it's helpful to have pantry staples like the ones we just listed and talked about. But I also think it's helpful to just really work on your meal planning skills so that you're purchasing what you need for those meals that week. I will go to the grocery store and I'll see a sale on black beans and I'll think like, oh yeah, like okay, like next week or in 2 weeks, like I'll do that. Now I've developed my own meal planning capabilities where I will open up my phone and put black beans in your meal plan next week reminder into my phone. But if I don't do that because I've got my kids with me, then like I'll buy those black beans. They'll go on the shelf, probably by other black beans I've already purchased. And I wasted money in a sense. And I know like I will use them later on. But also like my week to week budget does a lot better if I stick with like I need this. And it's a skill to learn, but it is a helpful one in terms of your budget.
I am so in love with everything that you shared because there's so many great takeaways with this. I mean, my kitchen is a working kitchen, but it is deep in the heart of a tiny place in New York City proper. And so our refrigerator is undermounted underneath a cabinet. So we do not have a full-size refrigerator. Our freezer is basically the size of maybe two shoe boxes side by side.
Ooh.
And our quote unquote pantry or cabinets are also very limited. So I cannot buy things in bulk and I can't even make things that are with leftovers. Like I have to be very conscientious about the portions that I'm creating as well.
Yeah.
So I don't have the luxury to buy 5 pounds of oranges when they're on sale. So that's something that I tend to include too. I think what you said also about like recognizing what you have and making sure you have a use for it. Don't be tempted because everything's always going to be on sale, people. It's not like the end of sales forever. My point to that is making sure you inventory things too. Like, what is it that you have on hand that's coming close to expiration date? Because we're going to talk a little bit too about food safety as well, and making sure these best by or use by or sell by dates, if they're fast approaching, so easy. You can reach out to Jessi and check out some of her resources. You can go online and look up a recipe generator and type in some random ingredients and poof, there you go. Just like Jessi said, you have a meal that you didn't even realize you cobble together. Maybe you add a protein or some legumes to it and you've now, increased some of the nutritional value to it. So talk to me too about the food safety part of this discussion. Are you teaching people also about cross-contamination and, making sure they're using the proper equipment for certain types of foods?
Sure, I think that comes up with a lot of people, especially when they're more of a beginner cook, like just learning a couple different things like don't use the same cutting board for raw meat that you're going to use for produce. I am a stickler on food safety as far as like bleaching and like making sure that I really clean something that has touched raw meat or raw fish or egg because I've been to a lot of friends' houses, a lot of people's places, and they, soap and hot water does everybody good. However, I just think that like there's like that extra little mile you can go, and it can be really simple. I have a really simple, like little tiny amount of bleach spray that's like water and like a teeny amount of bleach just to sanitize everything. So I'm a big on that, but I've taken, oh, what's it called? Serve
The
safe.
Serve Safe.
So many times, so like way too many like horrible things are in my head. So I can go as far as that with food safety with people, just kind of slowing down and like looking at what you're about to cook and assembling like, okay, is there anything that could go wrong with this meal that I need to be aware of? Do I need to be aware of cooking temperatures? Do I need to, because that can really deter people. If you cook something and make your family sick, that does not bode well for your confidence. So, or it just makes you feel like, awesome, I burnt this food and it's not good enough to eat, and now it's going in the garbage. Like, we want to eliminate food waste as much as possible. I do think it's unrealistic to expect yourself to never have food waste. So, realistic expectations are good too. And also following a first in, first out kind of rule. So, making sure even just the way you store food in your fridge and your freezer in a functional way. Using an inventory method is something I teach as well. But making sure that you're putting things in the fridge. And I recommend once, maybe twice a week, doing a fridge check where you go in the fridge and you just make sure that the things that need to get eaten, the leftovers, the half block of cheese that's sitting there, whatever it is, like bring it to the front so you are seeing it. Produce drawers are really helpful if you're checking them. So that's another thing to consider, making sure that you are literally opening all the drawers, rotating it. And if you're not sure you're going to eat that half bell pepper, slice it up real quick, throw it in the freezer. Like you don't have I personally I don't do a lot of blanching and freezing. I know that can help it last much longer in the freezer. But if I got half a bell pepper and I'm thinking, well, maybe we'll do fajitas next week, I'll add it to my inventory that it's going in the freezer. I will slice it, throw it in a sandwich baggie, and call it good.
These are great tips. I would also say a public service announcement for anyone who does live in a community where you have a composting program, that if you
Mhm.
do end up with any of your scraps or things are going bad and you would rather not take a chance in eating anything, you can bag them up, stick them in your fridge or freezer, I should say. Or we have a composting bin with a like a very small countertop sitting composting bin with a filter. And every week we bring it to the drop-off center and they take it and do with it what
Yeah.
they will. So that's very helpful if your community does have a program like that.
Any way to kind of reduce the waste or reuse something, what I do is I take all of my produce scraps, my
Yeah.
like ginger, my garlic peels, onion peels, carrot, everything, broccoli stock. If I don't use it, it's going in a big gallon sized bag and I fill it to the brim and that's in my freezer. And then as soon as that's really full and I've got some time, and then this is on my website, but I make my own broth that way. And it's super simple. Get super simple and just another great way to use up that produce and the scraps in another way.
Yeah, that is so great. The gifts that keep on giving, right? Instead of throwing
Mhm.
things away to repurpose them. As we're coming up on the end of our discussion, I have a few questions more to ask you. First, with as busy of a schedule that you have, with all the things, the moving parts that are in your life right now, what are some of the productivity tools that you use to keep on track? And I'll also ask you too, how do you create, I won't say balance, I'll say harmony with your professional life and your personal life? Like, what are the things that you absolutely hold as non-negotiables for your own health and mental wellness?
Yeah. This planner here saves everything that I do. I'm a big planner person. That's probably as far of as a type A dietitian as I get. Like I don't go much further than that, but this planner is like that's my life. So I'm a big advocate for planners. I'm a big advocate for meal planning in general. That is a non-negotiable for me. Like we will have a weekly meal plan. It will be either as simple or as complicated as we're going to make it for the week. My other newer non-negotiable is being done with clients around 8 or 8:30 p.m. in our time. Like I last year or two, I definitely overcommitted myself and like I teach dance as well. So I would do that mid-afternoon to early evening and then I'd see clients until like 10 o'clock at night. And it's like that all had to go. Like you have to have boundaries for yourself and as an entrepreneur and as a human being. So I'm finding boundaries are so helpful. And honestly, like I've put much more emphasis is the general health thing, a wellness thing, whatever. Sleep. I have put a lot of effort into a good sleep hygiene routine. We do this often for our kids. We're always like, oh, they need to sleep. They need to take a nap. They have to follow this routine. They need to get ready for bed and da 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 da. And I'm like, huh, well, that's interesting. Pretty sure adults might benefit from that too. And we do. I am a big advocate for like sleep is just something so important for whether meal planning or cooking or being with kids all day or not being with kids all day, whatever you're doing, whatever kind of space and capacity you have in your brain, I think gets limited when you don't have restful sleep. So I put a lot of emphasis and boundaries around sleep as well.
That's a huge one with me too. As we've also shared in these podcast episodes, that we're starting to see research around potential correlations to neurodegenerative disorders or cognitive decline if you are foregoing quality or quantity sleep. So that's a big thing. I also work with a lot of college students, so I tend to use this opportunity to remind them, don't pull all-nighters, my friends. You are no good to yourselves or to others if you're working on a half functioning brain. So please
Yeah.
make sure you're getting quality and quantity sleep. Jessi, what do you see the future you? Are you going to be expanding your services? Are you going to build your own facility one day? What do you see? What do you
That's
see
funny
in the
you
two to
say
five to
that.
10? Oh, yeah?
Yeah, no, that's my pie in the sky. I have a couple conversations in the works as far as like where, when that could happen. My dream goal is to have a functioning space that families are coming in. Right now, I have like just like I did when I started as a dietitian, I've got a travel kitchen and a cooler, and I like haul it around, and I love it. My dream is to have a facility that is a bit like an old home ec classroom where like there's a functional space for us to learn together. There's individual little islands for everybody to be taking their cooking classes and teach, like having their skills. There's stools for children. I can see all of it. It's so pretty. I just have to, back up and do all the nitty gritty work to get there. But that's why I think my first response with your earlier question about entrepreneurship is like dream it and like go for it, but slow down. You have time to get there, which is what I'm trying to remind myself of. Like, I gotta do some of this nitty gritty stuff first. My pie in the sky, like painting the walls of this facility I'm gonna have one day. Choosing paint colors does not matter right now. Focus on the nitty gritty, but it will get there.
I really love that because it's kind of like the one-stop shopping. Like you're bringing people in, but you're also able to provide services to them, and you can use that as an office space for yourself too, as a secondary location. Because a lot of us, like Jesse said, we either schlep around our offices to go remotely, or we do a lot of things in our own home. We work from our home. So having the delineation of this is my work life and this is my personal life, I think just mentally speaking too, allows us to create those boundaries that Jesse was talking about earlier. Is there anything that we didn't discuss or talk about, or anything that I didn't ask you today that you think we might have missed and you want to share with our listeners and our viewers?
We did touch on meal planning quite a bit, and I do like to make that work a little bit easier for people. Sometimes people often ask, I think, dietitians, like, oh, can you write me a meal plan? That's a really big ask. Yes, we can, but no, we probably don't want to. But however, I have written one for families. It's a 3-month one. It is not just everything's laid out for you and it's perfect. Well, it is perfect, but no, it's laid out for you in a way that helps you actually learn the skills to make it happen beyond those 3 months. Like, not that I wouldn't want people to continue to purchase from me, but if you don't need me because I've taught you the skills that you need, then that's a good thing. So that's my goal, is to help you not need my support. It maybe just my continued like cheering and camaraderie. I'm here for that. So people can find more information about that on my site. They can hop on my email list and get in there for be the first to know on everything.
My final two questions, my two-part questions are, Jesse, what is on your plate today? So in the figurative sense, when we're wrapped up with this conversation, what is the thing that you'll be working on next? And then what is your next meal?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So my what's on my plate for the day today is actually doing a lot of dance curriculum. So I do teach dance still, to from beginner to advanced: ballet, tap, jazz, lyrical, hip hop, all the things. So I've got a lot of dance curriculum work to do today. My next blog post I'll be writing for people is a free 7-day meal plan to get people started if they need some added support and they just kind of want to be like, what would a culinary family dietitian plan for her family for 7 days? So I'm working on finishing that resource up. I've got some office calls with a program that I'm a part of. So I'll be hopping on that and kind of bouncing ideas off and getting some, I don't know, getting those entrepreneur juices flowing. And trying to think, I think that's about it as far as like what's on my plate. Playing with my kids is always going to be there. We did a lot of Legos this morning. So we'll do some more outside time after school. But what is going to be on my plate? Well, tonight's dinner is build your own sandwich bar night. So I'd love to incorporate those into my week in general, like build your own bowl, build your own parfait, build your own breakfast plate, whatever it is. It's a lot of giving my kids back autonomy of like, you get to choose what's going on your plate. Here's all the sandwich stuff. It's kind of like your own little Subway bar at home. So that's going on my plate today, and I'm looking forward to that.
I think providing people, or especially children, with exposure to things, different experiences, but also like you're doing too, with allowing your community, the people with whom you serve, to have flexibility and creativity in their own lives. It kind of takes away all of that pressure of having to have a quote unquote perfect meal. So thank
Mhm.
you so much, Jesse, for spending time with us today and for sharing so many great insights and so many great takeaways. I really think we gleaned a lot from you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.